On the global affairs framework, I'm pleased the committee and this government agree in a number of areas in regards to the global affairs framework in particular, but not limited to the importance of ensuring join-up between our various domestic and international strategies. In the face of the invasion of Ukraine, nations are being tested on whether they support not just the principle, but the reality of a rules-based approach to protect their values. And this is why it's so important that we set out clearly what our values are and what we hope to achieve through our international work. Scotland's commitment to internationalism and upholding these values can be found in the Global Affairs Framework, which we published yesterday. The framework sets out the values and principles that underpin our international activity, recognising in particular that, increasingly, the global and regional context impacts the achievement of domestic objectives. And for this reason, it's imperative that Scotland becomes more active internationally on issues that matter most in helping Scotland flourish. We're a nation that prides itself on being open, welcoming and connected, and we've demonstrated that we can make a constructive contribution to addressing global challenges. On our relationship with the European Union, the EU represents what might be the most successful peace project in world history, and we will continue to advocate Scotland's place in both it and the world. As a fully integrated part of the EU for half a century, Scotland was woven into the very fabric of Europe, our economy benefiting from access to the world's largest market and our social and regulatory protections reflecting the highest global standards. Scotland shares its fundamental values with the EU, including the rule of law, democracy, human dignity and equality, and is why the Scottish Government is committed to remaining close to the European Union. Consistent with this is Scotland's commitment that we will seek to align with the European Union in a manner that contributes towards maintaining and advancing our world-class standards across a range of policy areas. Doing so helps protect the health and well-being of people in Scotland, it maintains Scotland's international reputation, and by protecting the standards that Scotland enjoys, we will ease the process of Scotland's eventual return to the European Union. Until that point in time, we will maintain alignment where possible with the EU through primary and secondary legislation, including through the powers granted under the UK withdrawal from the European Union Continuity Scotland Act 2021. This Act provides Scottish ministers with an essential power to maintain their ability to align with the EU where other legislative methods may not be available or the most appropriate. Our approach to using this power was set out in draft for Parliament's consideration on the 29th of October 2021. Of course, international development, I pay tribute as ever to the cross-party support that the Scottish Government's international development work finds in this Parliament. We do not take that support for granted, particularly in light of the cuts to aid that we've seen made by the UK Government, with devastating impact on the ground in the Global South, particularly during a global pandemic. The committee raised a number of important points, including the importance placed on policy coherence by the OECD and the United Nations. Our commitment to policy coherence for sustainable development, or PSD, is well documented. It already forms a key plank of our international development strategy. We are clear that international development finance is only one part of the development toolkit. The impact that global North countries can make is equally, if not more important than their financial investment, not only across their government policy, but through encouraging their populations to think about their impact of their actions on others, whether in relation to climate change behaviours or fair trade choices.
The Royal Society called on the Government to prioritise areas where Scotland can offer expertise, such as in transition to net zero and protecting human rights. Most respondents who addressed the question of international relations suggested that the Scottish Government should use culture and soft power to promote Scotland internationally. In his evidence to the committee, the Cabinet Secretary said that the Scottish Government would pursue an internationalisation agenda to influence the world around us to the issues that matter most. 2 weeks ago, I attended an event at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, hosted by the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforests. Minister Mary McCallan described the fantastic support the Scottish Government is providing to preserve the biodiversity and expansion of Scotland's rainforests, the policy element of soft power. As the Scottish Parliament's champion for Celtic rainforests, I was there to introduce the premiere of a film, another great soft power that Scotland has. The film is called The Ghost Rainforest, which tells the story of 5 Indigenous leaders from the Amazon rainforest who came to Scotland for COP26 to stand up for their rights as Indigenous peoples and the important role they play in looking after nature. They took some time out to visit and bless the Cormornachan rainforest near Loch Goylehead in Argyll and Bute. In the village hall afterwards, the Scottish Ceilidh tradition took a very Amazonian twist, with strong songs from our two cultures intertwining like the wurts and lichens or passion flowers and orchids of our respective rainforests. A commitment to restoring our environment shared by different cultures on two different continents, the cultural element of soft power.
I would like to begin by thanking the committee for the work that they're doing and welcoming the publication of the Scottish Government's eagerly anticipated Global Affairs Framework. This sets out the key principles that will guide and focus Scotland's international engagement as we move out of a post-Brexit and post-COVID context. Since the UK left the EU, the world has endured significant shocks and international crises as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are only now just beginning to come out of this. Although Scotland is a small nation, we have big ambitions to positively shape international affairs and support and promote key global agendas. This is a part of our mandate as set out in the Scotland Act, which allows the Scottish Government to assist the UK Government on international matters that may have an impact on devolved policy areas.
It should be for every member across this chamber. This inquiry underlines the Scottish Government's work to strengthen our international relationships, increase trade and investment, and ultimately achieve the overarching objective of sustainable economic growth in Scotland. Like other countries, Scotland is facing unprecedented challenges, whether responding to global concerns such as climate change, COVID recovery, or the cost of living crisis. The Scottish Government is showing leadership and amplifying the need for actions that are underpinned by the need for social, economic and climate justice. Presiding Officer, we might be a small country, but our values have beaconed outwards for centuries, forging alliances and becoming a prominent voice in the global community. Just look at the Scottish diaspora. Scots have spread themselves across the world, a community of people with proud Scottish roots, contributing so much to their home countries, but forever tied to the Scottish nation. Scotland's diaspora, estimated to be over 40 million people, is a powerful cultural, economic and political tool. We may not yet be an independent nation, but my goodness, Scotland's presence is already strong across the globe. Indeed, when the First Minister visits the United States next week, she'll be visiting a country that's home to 20 million Scottish Americans, an outstanding foundation to further an independent Scotland's global interests. The UK Government has proven itself incapable or unwilling to tap into the significant potential of Scotland's diaspora, choosing instead to focus on a failing UK construct. Engagement goes both ways, and Scotland has benefited enormously from people coming over and enhancing and enriching our society too. Scotland's message to refugees has been a welcoming one, where new Scots are treated with dignity and respect as they flourish and settle in their new home. Compare and contrast with post-Brexit Britain, where the UK Government continues to conjure up a hostile environment for migrants, restricts trade and the movement of labour, and alienates itself from international alliances. If there was ever any doubt about the need for good international relations, the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate emergency and the war in Ukraine too have all reaffirmed how international cooperation is essential. The recently published Global Affairs Framework, highlighted by the Cabinet Secretary and others today, sets out the values and principles underpinning the Scottish Government's international work and the basis on which the Scottish Government will prioritise its international activity. As a nation moves its political agenda beyond its borders, it does so based on the issues and the politics that are cared about internally. International affairs must always link back to our domestic ambitions. As a country committed to social, economic and climate justice, with the ambition to rejoin the EU and be part of our progressive international institutions, our domestic politics provides the foundation for us to be leaders alongside other forward-thinking nations in international development, climate policy and in human rights. I welcome the work and leadership of the Scottish Government to incorporate the Feminist foreign policy framework that Claire Adamson and others have also mentioned today. Feminist foreign policy is moving away from what might traditionally come to mind when you think about foreign policy, like military force and violence, instead prioritising topics like peace, gender equality, environmental issues and human rights. A feminist foreign policy listens to marginalised voices and aims to remove gender, racial, sexual and socio-economic boundaries, amongst others. It is empathetic, sensitive, caring and relational. Empathetic, sensitive, caring and relational. Presiding Officer, Scottish politics are inherently feminist. Scottish voters have noted their interest in politics and policies that emphasise equality of all kinds, including parity, justice and fairness. Scottish policies aim to create a society focused on social, economic and climate justice, and enacting these principles in our foreign policy is not only the right thing to do, it's something that comes naturally to us. Finally, for the Scottish Government to realise its potential as a good global citizen, we must listen and act in response to often unheard voices, including the young and those from the Global South.
In so doing, inspire others, including Norway, to join the conversation and make the long-term commitment to move away from fossil fuel production. Because only by countries learning about the just transition together can we actually wean ourselves off of oil and gas responsibly and in a just way. Our climate will be a strong focus for Scottish Government's international work going forward, and I'm pleased that the imminent launch of an office in Copenhagen will cement the relationship with the Danes further. The early commitments for the two countries to work together on heat decarbonisation, for example, is so critical given the cost of living crisis. Denmark's response in the 1970s to the last energy crisis has given us a big toolbox of solutions. And I know that the Minister, Patrick Harvey, is determined to insulate homes and isolate Putin as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm not a member of the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Culture Committee, so I am speaking today more as a citizen of this country, which is something that Scotland's international work really does make me proud to be. I'm also proud to be a member and representative of an outward-looking internationalist party, one which prioritises imagining, building and strengthening links with foreign nations, including Norway, England and Canada. From the strong but touching remarks the Cabinet Secretary has made in explicit support of our European neighbours in Ukraine, to the First Minister's repeated, unequivocal support for new Scots here and for women and girls across the world, it is one of those issues where we can see real leadership being shown within the constraints of devolution and, indeed, despite them. Our First Minister is a UN Global Women Advocate, and I don't think that was supposed to happen. I think Scotland was meant to stay in its box there, but our devolved government has gained global influence and global respect. So what I'm seeing here is not just leadership of a government and a party, but global leadership. It's not just whiskey we're putting out there, although I don't underestimate or underappreciate that particular export. We are seeking to become the first country in the UK to adopt a feminist foreign policy. We know that climate change, wars and unstable economies are gendered issues. Women and girls are worst affected. Feminist foreign policy was not a term that I had ever heard growing up, but it is absolutely needed, and it's commendable that the Scottish Government is taking this forward as a pioneer within the UK. We don't just have a presence on the world stage now, but an influence. World-leading human rights legislation is being taken forward in here against racial discrimination, discrimination against women, and to improve the rights of disabled people. World-leading legislation coming out of this place. I just think that's fantastic. It's no longer stop the world, Scotland wants to get on. It's stop the world, Scotland has ideas and you're going to want to hear them. These efforts being carried out by the Scottish Government in international work are beneficial in any case. I will.
More Golden. Thank the member for taking an intervention. First of all, I'd like to clarify that we are, on these benches, supportive of international offices. Secondly, you mentioned these international offices as a success. Can you tell the Chamber which metric you're using to define that success? Emma Roderick.
I think if the member had listened, I just covered that and said it's really tough to put a number on the value of strong connections worldwide, which is what these offices are providing. And certainly, if Scotland does become independent, they will be the foundation for international relations going forward. Now, the Remain vote in Scotland is something that's still heartbreaking for me to think about. A European country torn out of the European Union, despite its citizens showing up at the polls to state clearly that that's not what they wanted. That's not democratic, and I suggest it's simply not one of many options, but something that is incumbent on our government for it to do what it can to retain in all possible ways the influence, benefits and relationships that we enjoyed as a member of the EU. I also look at examples such as the efforts on Kenmure Street in Glasgow last year, and I don't think it's out of turn to point out that perhaps, however coherent or incoherent the UK Government's policy currently is on reserved issues, the people of Scotland aren't happy with it. Our international work is that of a country which is welcoming, progressive and aspirational. And that vision, to me, sits in stark contrast to the statements I'm hearing from down south, which are often insular, laden with World War II metaphors, and display a want to go back to the good old days before those pesky regulations and rights, which, put simply, keep disabled people like me alive, were introduced. Presiding Officer, my principles and the principles of the SNP, the party which has won the last 11 elections in this country, are too often not reflected or are even contradicted by the UK's policy. Brexit is stark evidence of that truth, but it is not the only example. So I am delighted to see the work that is going on internationally off our own backs, sharing best practice like the baby box and promoting human rights across the globe.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a privilege to speak in this debate on the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee's report on the Scottish Government's international work. I congratulate the committee, led by convener Claire Adamson, on a thorough and important piece of work. It is very wide-ranging, I think, as reflected in the diversity of speeches that we've enjoyed listening to this afternoon. The key themes emerging from the committee inquiry were the importance of adopting a strategic approach, the need for a prioritisation of policies to flow from that approach, an emphasis on effective collaboration across government to encourage policy coherence in relation to both external affairs and how this interacts with domestic priorities, challenges in measuring impact and on how to enhance scrutiny. Presiding Officer, Scotland is a nation with a strong European heritage outlook and values. People voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU in 2016 and, of course, subsequently in every election following have endorsed the pro-European SNP. The committee report acknowledges the Scottish Government's position that the founding values of the EU, human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law and respect for human rights, are the Scottish Government's values. The publication of the Global Affairs Framework sets out with clarity the values and principles underpinning the Scottish Government's international work. I agree with the Cabinet Secretary that it's important to note that the Scottish Government's Global Affairs Framework is being published at a time when, in the face of the invasion of Ukraine, all nations are being tested on whether they support not just the principle, but the reality of adopting a rules-based approach to protect their values. As the new Global Affairs Framework sets out, and consistent with the evidence given to the committee inquiry, Scotland's international work will be guided by some key areas of focus: good global citizenship, maintaining the closest possible relationship with the European Union, gender equality, climate crisis and climate justice, respect for human rights and the rule of law, the role of our international networks and Scotland's culture. I'd like to focus my remarks on gender equality. The Scottish Government has stated its commitment to employing a feminist foreign policy for Scotland, fulfilling an SNP manifesto promise. Making Scotland the first country in the UK to adopt such a policy will join a small number of nations across the world, including Sweden, who were the first in the globe to do so in 2014. A feminist foreign policy includes moving away from what might traditionally be considered foreign policy and prioritising topics like peace, gender equality, environmental issues and human rights, focusing on the well-being of the world's most marginalised people, including women and girls. Thinking about foreign policy and international relations from the viewpoint of the world's most vulnerable groups, thereby taking an intersectional approach to challenging existing power structures such as racism, colonialism and male domination. Sweden's feminist foreign policy is based on the conviction that sustainable peace, security and development can never be achieved if half the world's population is excluded. The policy is a response to the discrimination and systematic subordination that still characterises everyday life for countless women and girls all over the world. Feminist foreign policy is an agenda for change to strengthen the rights, representation and resources for women and girls. In doing this, our government needs to be alive to our domestic policies as well as international. While Scotland approaches this from a relatively privileged position and with some world-leading legislation and many sound policies, We are not there yet in terms of eradicating the discrimination and violence which is an everyday reality for far too many women and girls in Scotland. There is still a gap between policy intention and legislative reality in some areas, for example, equally safe. It's progress, work in progress, which requires some urgency. Scotland's international work can create domestic opportunities and attract investment. Being a good global citizen and strengthening relationships with countries and continents can only be of benefit to the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer.
I'm proud of telling people who I meet in this job, Scotland will always aim to be a good global partner. I want that to be as an independent country, able to make its own decisions, which would allow us to stop selling arms to the likes of Saudi Arabia and move nuclear weapons away from the Clyde. That's been a good global partner. Not exporting refugees to Rwanda, which would also mean we'd be a good global partner. COP26 showed that the Scottish Government must follow through on its commitment to listen and act in response to often unheard voices, especially those of women and young people and from the global south. To be a true global partner, we must also ensure we must do all we can to ensure vaccine equity. The Global Affairs Framework commits Scotland to strive to ensure that our global environmental footprint is sustainable, playing a full role in tackling the global climate and nature crises. It also ensures that no one in Scotland is denied rights or opportunities because of their gender. Its policies and actions abroad should be consistent with its focus on equality, inclusion and human rights at home. Now, I want to commend the Scottish Council on Global Affairs, the SCGA, which will provide a hub for world-leading expertise on international issues. That was launched at the end of April, with the support of the Universities of Glasgow, St Andrews and Edinburgh, as its founding partners, promising a new forum for global affairs in Scotland. Our universities are world-beating. Let's not forget about that. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, the Scottish Government vision is for Scotland to be a thriving, inclusive and entrepreneurial country, delivering a just transition to a net-zero, nature-positive, well-being economy. On the Global Affairs Framework, Scotland is determined to be a good global citizen. The Global Affairs Framework publication yesterday underlines this point and provides that focus on a strategic approach for our international work. As the committee's report emphasises, Scotland has a huge range of businesses and civil society groups, either operating overseas or focusing on issues of global importance. Collectively, our country has huge strengths, not only in international affairs, but in related areas like human rights and conflict resolution, international development, climate justice, energy security and public health. And the framework provides a structure for the government to promote these strengths internationally. And if I can take the opportunity, because it's the first time that we have met since the foundation of the Scottish Council on Global Affairs, and I was pleased to see a representative of all of the parties at its launch. I think it is great news, given that Scotland has lacked a central institute that could bring knowledge and expertise together in an international context, that we now have a Scottish Council on Global Affairs in our programme and delivered, having been stated explicitly as an aim in our programme for government. So I look forward greatly to the work of that Scottish Council on Global Affairs in the months and the years